Hey guys, Enzo here from Home Theatre Engineering, and
Andrew.
We're here today. We're going to talk about something a little bit different, something very interesting that a lot of people ask about, which is a topic that we love to talk about and show people, which is Barco Projectors, and speaking to the boys at Barco Residential. It's been a long time coming. We wanted to do this video for a while, but unfortunately with COVID and everything else and trying to get all the planets aligning, but we're finally here.
So we've got Andy and Bart,
We've got Andy and Bart
from Barco.
And we'll split this up and we'll do a bit of Barco chat.
Andy, Bart, welcome.
Hi Andrew, hi Enzo. How are you guys?
How are you guys?
Okay, so first of all, thanks very much for coming and joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. Do you want to very quickly perhaps explain your roles in Barco, and then we've got some questions here which we can go through and learn a little bit more about the company and its product and its differences in terms of the company and the products.
Of course, after you, Bart.
All right, thanks, Andy. I'm Bart de Vos, Business Development Manager for Barco Residential for both the EMEA and the APAC markets, so Europe, Middle East and Africa, and then the entire Asian Pacific markets. I've been with Barco since 2007 and with Barco Residential since the beginning of 2019.
Okay.
My name's Andy Jones. I'm the sales engineer for the EMEA and APAC region. So I'm responsible for ensuring or helping our partners that everything they sell will ultimately work within the environments they're installing it in, both pre and post sales. Been with Barco since 2018.
Okay, and are you both just in Barco Residential, or do you work in other divisions?
Purely focused in and on Barco Residential activities. Since it's such a specific market, specific requirements, different requirements also than what we see on the commercial or on the Pro AV side, so purely residential.
Okay, so let's get into some questions here. I'll shoot off the first one. Give us a very brief sort of 2-minute history of Barco if you can.
Absolutely, and with pleasure. Barco has been around since 1934, so we were established back in 1934. Starting out actually as a consumer electronics company, making radios using American-made components, and that's what gave the name to the company. So Belgian American Radio Corporation, BARCO, Barco. And then over the years, we evolved into a B2B organization, thriving very much originally in the television industry, so still that touch point with consumer electronics, and then gradually broadening or widening our scope of activities. And bringing us to the point where Barco is today with 3 main pillars or 3 divisions, all of them enabling bright outcomes in their respective activities, which are entertainment, enterprise, and healthcare. If you're thinking about healthcare, there you're thinking about things like mammography, diagnostic imaging, recently also activities in the field of dental imaging. If you're thinking about enterprise, you're thinking about huge video walls where you're monitoring oil exploration, you're monitoring electricity grids, things like that. So we're talking either large-scale tiled LCD video walls, laser projection, direct view LED. But then at the same time, you're also talking about the software that runs behind all of that and actually makes that a reality. You're talking about things like ClickShare, our famous and known the world all over meeting solution, facilitating the sharing of information, data, etc., be it through a hardware button or through software implementations. And then last but not least, of course, the entertainment division, where we've got activities in the Pro AV business, thinking about rental market, think about concerts, car shows, fashion shows, museums, theme parks, and the like. And then, of course, last but not least, digital cinema, where we become the global market leader. That's about where Barco currently is today. And then to make it full circle, of course, with Barco Residential, we've got, again, the touch point with consumer electronics again, albeit at a very high level.
Excellent. Okay, so with Barco, what would you see as the key differences between perhaps Barco products and other products out there? Is there a difference in focus? Is there a difference in perhaps the priorities or the reason for developing the products you do? What do you see that is unique to Barco and your delivery to the market?
If we're focusing purely on Barco Residential for a second, I would say our focus is on, like I said, definitely on the high end, because we are aiming at a space where you're talking about screen sizes that are about 3 meters in width and upwards of that. And to light up a 3-meter wide screen with great color accuracy, with great uniformity, with good contrast, etc., all of those elements will require a very powerful projector in all regards. You're talking about the lens quality, you're talking about the optics that are used inside the units, the chipsets that are being selected, cooling, etc. And obviously, if you have such units, or you want to if you want to design and make such units, it comes with a certain, like I said, we set out to achieve the best of the best. We're basically trying to replicate the best cinema experience in private clients' homes or residences. So I would say that is what definitely differentiates us from what other manufacturers are doing.
We've fired up the Bragi in our second demo room here, and I must admit, whether it's the latest firmware update, but I think a few things have changed, but we're really enjoying the picture on that at the moment, and that's actually running as a point of interest through a Mad VR, which I believe you've used those as well, or have been looking at that perhaps in connection. But anyway, it's running through a Mad VR, and to be quite honest, out of the box, this looked
very, very impressive,
very, very good. Yeah. So very happy with that. The thing, I'll let Enzo ask some questions in a minute. One of the things that stands out about Barco is Barco, as I understand it, is predominantly, if not completely, and you can set me straight on that, DLP. Obviously, there is a lot of other technologies out there that we know other brands are using. Why DLP?
I would say a couple of things there. I mean, when we're talking about image quality, we always like to talk about an image quality puzzle, because there's multiple elements in there that as a manufacturer you can control, or you should be controlling. And there's, of course, other elements into a cinema project or into a media room project where we as a manufacturer, we do not control certain things. Like, we do not always know, or certainly cannot control, which kind of screen is going to be used, the screen gain, is it acoustically transparent or not? Is there going to be ambient light in play or not? But then focusing on the things that as a manufacturer we do have under our control, a couple of elements come into play. And indeed, the imaging device that a manufacturer selects is an important one, a very important one. And as you rightfully say, we are using DLP only indeed. And one of the main benefits there is that you can get, a couple of benefits there. You get high light output, but also super stability over time. So you will not see any degradation, not after 5,000 hours, not after 10, 20,000 hours. I mean, the DMD itself has a lifetime of 100,000 hours. So that alone should be enough to take away any potential concerns that the clients may have over this. Then a couple of other things are the insane sharpness. I mean, just firing up a Barco Residential projector typically elicits responses like "ooh" or "wow" or "we've never seen this before."
Yes,
and that's just the inherent nature of DLP, I guess. Another thing that is greatly, exactly, it's super cinematic. And if we think back about what I mentioned earlier about Barco being the global leader in cinema technology, that's where that entire expertise and knowledge comes from. We've been at the forefront of this for years and years. Have a global market share of over 52%. It's just insane. I mean, it is the technology of choice for many Hollywood A-listers, both in the professional side and then also what they prefer for their private screening rooms. So all of those elements together make DLP a natural fit for the residential use cases as well.
And it's really important for us. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, with gaming becoming more and more of an important element in residential installations as well, that's yet another benefit of the DLP technology, because we've got a response time of microseconds, whereas competing technologies are in the leagues of milliseconds. And while that may not seem like a lot, it makes a hell of a lot of difference when in actual use. Combine that with superior latency performance on the residential models, especially on the Pulse platform models, where we have 20 milliseconds or less, and are still working on a project to bring that down even further. I mean, for the gamers who tuned in right now, 20 milliseconds for a pro gamer will not be exactly what they require, but for your casual gamer, it's super, super impressive. Now, take the gaming experience from a 75-inch TV or even a 90-inch TV and expand that to 120, 150, 200-inch and beyond projection size screens. Well, all of a sudden you get a truly immersive gaming experience.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to us, I think, to be working with a platform that delivers reliability. And, if people are investing in something and it's going to last the distance, the things that stand out to me with Barco are, as you said, the lifetime of the chipset. 100,000 hours is outstanding. There are obviously other considerations, but also the backup and support. So once you get into a Barco, what I've noticed is that there is always just rolling and ongoing support within Barco. And it seems like a close connection between, certainly us and Barco and our clients as well. So those are the things that are really important. What have you got there?
Probably the elephant in the room, apart from myself, is probably the blacks. If we touch on the subject of color, black, we know that with DLP, people do consider it limiting. Let's talk about it, because some people probably will write about it in the comments. So, what's your take on it?
I suppose rather than blacks, we're talking more contrast here, although blacks obviously pay, 50% of that is black. Yes. It's true to say that with DLP technology, typically speaking, the black level will not be as deeper black, what I sometimes refer to as that oil slick black of SXRD or LCOS type projectors. And that's just typical of the way the technology works, with it being a reflective technology, as opposed to the way the LCOS and SXRD technologies work, where we can actually, or they can almost shutter door the lights that's being emitted through the panel. So as a result, they can get blacker blacks. What's important is not necessarily how black the image can go, but the actual contrast and the definition within that black level. That's what's much more important. So, all of us actually are wearing, black T-shirts or jumpers. And, I'm looking specifically at the moment at Enzo's collar, where he's got the hood, and, he's got 2 or 3 different shades of black where the shadow detail is falling differently. And we want to be able to pick out and define that level of information within the black level, not just have it as one black that blends into the background with no information in it. And that's where what we do, and with the DLP technology do, is important. We ensure that the ANSI contrast level, which is actually the real world contrast, and ANSI contrast is measured where we display 50% of the image as black, 50% of white as like a checkerboard pattern, so like a chessboard. And that in reality is how we watch images. When we watch a movie scene, it's not just a dark scene. There will be bright stars in the sky, or, maybe someone has a mobile phone on screen that's emitting light, etc. And we have to be able to reproduce both light and dark within the same image. So we have to ensure that our projectors are capable of defining that level of detail in the black whilst providing that same brightness required to illuminate, perhaps a 140, even a 200-inch screen. And of course, what a lot of people forget is that, the larger the screen, the more light output we need. And of course, the more light output we have, inevitably our black level is going to become slightly elevated because, as soon as you have lights, your black raises, there's only so much dynamic range that you can actually achieve. That's something that we as a manufacturer are working to address. And I'm sure possibly is one of the questions that either Andrew or Enzo have, which is a new feature we've brought out on a product called the Njord, called Dynablack, which is our dynamic black level, where we adjust the illumination system, in this case laser, based on the content that's being watched. So in darker scenes, we can reduce the light output of the laser, which lowers our black level. And in bright scenes, we increase it, which obviously gives us the brightness as required. So that's something that, tied in with our excellent ANSI contrast, will help to address the black levels. And like all of the features that we often add to the Pulse platform, will trickle down because of the technology we use, which is FPGA as our core kind of processing. When we introduce software upgrades, we can very easily then trickle that down into other models, providing the hardware allows. So Dynablack, which is our dynamic contrast, will actually come to other models in the Pulse platform, such as Medea, Boulder, Bragi, Loki, over, I believe, the next 6 to 9 months.
Okay. I think you've hit on a key thing there, and something I've talked about in my videos. I get a little bit sort of antsy with people because what can you say? No, but seriously, people go on and on and on about black, and it's like, yes, but if you have got this black and this white and they're this close together, you have no dynamic range. And
correct,
that's a big deal for me, trying to explain to people, look, it's a scale that can slide this way, and it's a scale that can slide that way as well. And for people to comprehend that and understand that there's massive value in having a wider dynamic range, and if it's shifted this way, if your whites are a little bit brighter, then also perceptually your blacks are going to look blacker. And trying to get this across, and then say, look, it's not the only factor in a great picture. It's a bit like people who get fixated on resolution, and many times, and Enzo's seen us do it. People will come in and go, "That's an amazing 4K picture," and it's not. It's 1080p.
Yes.
And when people start talking about 8K, I'm like, oh, really? Can we just get good picture quality? Can we focus on the key things, which is dynamic range, accurate color reproduction, truly fulfill color spaces and things like that. So yeah, mate, I hear you, and it's great. It's great to be hearing that and talking about real numbers as well. But I think our industry tends to obsess, or some of the customers at least tend to obsess on one point, and sometimes they miss a truckload of other information that goes past. So I think that's good.
Oh, very much so. Just very quickly on that point. So obviously, we talk about the dynamic range and of the contrast, and when it comes to HDR performance, that's what's really important. That makes a big difference. So that's one key thing. Also, some of your viewers may not be surprised, but many, I'm sure, probably will, that when we talk ANSI contrast and measured contrast in a cinema, in reality, the specifications of many manufacturers of 100,000, a million to one, etc. They're just pie in the sky. In reality, good contrast ANSI, as measured in a cinema, would be 80 to 1. That would be pretty exceptional performance. Many residential cinemas will not even achieve that. No. So it kind of puts into perspective for people, that what you see on a data sheet doesn't necessarily mean anything when it comes into, the real world scenario. And, you've got to understand the specifications that you're being presented. It's a little bit like, watts on loudspeakers and, power amplification, etc. You have to look at how it's measured, if you're talking amplifiers, what the distortion is, etc., etc. There are ways that numbers can be manipulated to make them look better than they are.
I remember Floyd Toole said there's more information on the sidewall of a tyre than there is on a loudspeaker specification. And,
yes.
And the same thing really applies. We've actually got a video coming out. I won't dwell on this, but we've got a video we're going to make on a projector that was sold out of the grey market, out of a van at the back of a shopping centre. And this thing does, it has 5,000 lumen output. It does everything in the universe and more. And I think it cost like $250 or something. So, but, we want to highlight that to get people to understand that the numbers, in some cases don't mean anything. And that makes it harder for companies that publish real numbers that do mean something, because people then sort of get confused. I think the other thing that's really important is people taking something like a projector that advertises, incredible blacks, but then they put it in a room where there's lots of leaky ambient light, and they've got too large a screen for their light output. And I think you guys know us well enough. Our thing is all about making sure that all of the factors are correct. That you can just go and buy a whole bunch of gear, but if you haven't really connected the screen size to the projector and the ambient light in the room and your seating locations and everything else, then for each of those metrics, you're losing something. And, and I think that's one of the reasons that we like Barco, because, you've also helped us make sure that what we're doing is correct, and that helps us pass it on to our customers. So, yeah.
You touched on HDR, so that was the next thing I was going to bring up, just on the topic of HDR and tone mapping. The HDR light curve using different profiles. So if you guys want to touch on that, that'd be great, because I think that's a really big thing for Barco.
And the upcoming products that, things like Lumigen and Mad VR. I'm just wondering what your take is on that.
Of course. Bart, do you want to take that one or start, and then I'll fill in any blanks?
Sounds good. Yeah, indeed. Like you said, Enzo, indeed, the way that we go about HDR is indeed we have the ability to create different profiles. So based on the different types of HDR or levels of HDR content that are available out there, because you've got things like the Meg, for example, or Aquaman, very high nits, very high nit content, both in the Max CLL and the Max FALL portions of that. Also mastered in a 4,000 nit container, for example. That would be one end of the spectrum. But then at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you would have something like Goodfellas or Blade Runner 2049, which is a few hundred nits at best for Max CLL, and the Max FALL is actually a little bit below that even. Yeah. If you take that combined in a mastering luminance of 4,000 nits, well, then all of a sudden, certain tone mapping will compress that down and make the image look dull, very dim. Now, using the different profiles, you can completely make that look perfect. But as you said, companies like Lumigen or Mad VR, with their processors in between, it provides for a completely, next level dynamic tone mapping for HDR experience. And at this kind of level of projects that the likes of you are doing, and then combined with our products, it just is a very logical marriage, I would say, to have such a processor combined with one of the projectors.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
I'll let you take this one.
We were just talking about this the other day, talking about with the big question about going scope or 16:9 as well. There's this big thing about 2-to-1 ratio screens, or the fact that films like Aquaman, for instance, that are dual ratio, and Mission Impossible was dual ratio with IMAX. Where are you guys at with that?
Wow. Okay. That one's a bit of a rabbit hole, I would say. How long do we have? I would suggest that there are a number of things at play here, and I'll try and condense my answer down as much as possible. Obviously, you mentioned the different formats. So typical screen formats would be 16:9 scope, and then the kind of outlier of 2.0 in the middle, which you kind of really for reference cinemas, I would suggest. The key thing here is understanding what the client is watching. So if a client's a big gamer, wants to watch the Aussie rules football at the weekend, etc., maybe it's what I would call a media room as opposed to a cinema. Not necessarily true to that, but inherently that would be the case.
Yeah.
16:9 is almost certainly the way for them to go, because most of the content, the sources and the content itself are going to be playing back is 16:9, so they're going to get max fill on that screen. The bulk of movies, on the other hand, are filmed in CinemaScope. Not all of them, but certainly the vast majority. So if you've got a customer doing the content they're going to be watching is, movies, I would suggest that CinemaScope is arguably the best way to go for your average kind of prosumer customer. The reference screen type, in my opinion, would be a four-way masking 2.0 screen. So a 2.0 screen is the perfect middle ground between 16:9 and scope. So it ultimately means that we get maximum real estate for both whilst normalizing the difference between the two. The downside with the 2.0 screen is typically, obviously, when we're talking about cinemas, if we want to go, a 6 meter wide 2.0 screen, we need minimum for the image alone 3 meters tall, plus then obviously the frame, etc. And that often is actually the defining factor. Often the rooms aren't big enough to opt for a 2.0 screen. Yep. Or sometimes, client budget, a four-way masking 2.0 screen is often, quarter the price again of a scope lateral masking screen. So sometimes budget is the reason. So to condense it down, I would say it comes down to really the content you're using and arguably the type of room, but the type of room isn't necessarily the defining factor. It's the content that drives it.
Yeah, well, we tend to always find that people that watch a lot of sport, obviously, always going to be the 16:9.
As a rule of thumb, yeah.
There is always that rule of thumb. But this changing a ratio in films is starting to become an annoying trend, in my opinion. But
that is an interesting one. Typically, Christopher Nolan and IMAX content, where he adjusts the aspect ratio on the fly, movie to movie. It depends on the content itself. So sometimes the UHD versus the UHD HDR disc will or won't change aspect ratio. Depends how it's mastered. Kaleidoscope versus physical disc media, etc. So it depends how you're viewing it too. But he will change for cinematic effect the shape of the content. And typically for me, when I watch those type of movies, I will actually personally choose to crop away the content when it goes to 16:9. So essentially I will lose that content top and bottom. And the reason being is, if I'm watching a movie, the whole reason we all watch movies is we often talk about the suspension of disbelief. And for me, if a movie changes aspect ratio midway through, and certainly in the residential market, because they don't have masking typically in cinemas that do this, but in residential, then your masks would close. And all of a sudden, I've lost that suspension of disbelief.
Yes,
so for me, I would crop away that image and watch it in scope. But, I also say, ultimately, the customer is the person paying the bill, each to their own. Some customers like linear stretch, as an example. I personally don't, but I can understand why some customers might want to say, I've paid money on a CinemaScope screen. I always want to fill it, even if a soccer ball becomes a rugby ball.
we actually one of our videos, and I'll plug one of our videos, about a year ago, Andrew actually had Aquaman on screen, and we showed what cutting off with an anamorphic lens does. And, the fact that the director has all the correct information in that specific area, so losing top and bottom who it doesn't really matter. And I tend to agree with that.
Correct.
Unless you're doing, 4x3 like Zack Snyder does, which is even another.
Let's not go there.
Let's not go there either. But but yeah, look, I mean, I agree that at the end of the day, it's the client pays the bills and it's what the client views. And probably touching on bills, I guess, the next point was always going to be people ask why is Barco so expensive? And I know you touched before on obviously the fact that you guys target, that more expensive product, but realistically,
I think that's like asking why is Rolls Royce expensive?
Yeah,
and I think expensive. Yeah,
but is it though? Because over time, if you weigh up, the fact that there's ongoing costs, is it more expensive?
The life of the chip, the support, the ongoing software upgrades, the capability of the optics and stuff. It's a purchase that, in my mind, is going to outlast many others. So, but I suppose let's let you answer the question. I think expensive is a dangerous word.
It is a bit of a dangerous word.
I think. We're going to talk about this in a while, but we've just unboxed the Freya, and you look in that and you go, okay, I get this. This is amazing. So, but yeah, if you'd like to speak to that briefly, because it's something that, one of the criticisms we get from people is that, it's all right for you guys, you're paying with expensive toys, and we appreciate that there are people out there who want great cinemas, but also, they have financial constraints. But there are also people out there on the other side of the coin who don't have those financial constraints and want these cinemas. And that's a very personal thing. And Barco has, and correct me if I'm wrong, has positioned it in a place where it's delivering a premium product. Is that correct?
That is correct indeed. And to come back to what you were mentioning, Enzo, about being expensive and focusing on the high-end segment of the market, it's not exactly that we're finding ourselves, that we think of ourselves as being expensive. I mean, if we look at value for money, then I would say it's actually very reasonable, considering indeed the cost of R&D, considering the level of quality of components that we go for. Indeed, with the FPGA-based platform, it allows us a lot of flexibility. It allows us for lots of firmware update over time. And basically, you can think of those units as, compare them to a Tesla. If you talk to a Tesla owner that purchased a car 3, 4, 5 years ago, they will all tell you the same thing. They're owning a much better car today. While in reality, it's of course still the same car. And same goes for clients of ours that purchased a Loki, for example, when it first came out. Clients that have gone through all the firmware updates that we've done since that client purchased the unit originally, let's say, for example, one in 2017, that client will get a Loki with the same performance as a client that just ordered the Loki and took reception of it, and that came out of the factory 3-4 weeks ago, based on of course the assumption that the firmware level is exactly the same. So if you again looking at value for money, it's incredible, really. And also, we don't really like to talk about an investment or a return on investment, because in cases like this, it's all about the experience. It's about emotion. It's about sharing moments continuously over the years, multiple years, with your family, with your friends, things like that. And so what we like to talk about, or how we see things rather, is a return on experience, which is something, it's like that advertising for the credit cards, right? You want to buy this is the cost. You want to buy this is the cost. And at the end, it's basically an amount of experience, and that is just priceless.
Yep. No, that's true.
No, and I think that all comes down to like you said, what's included, and the fact that there's not this expectation where you buy a Barco today, we don't expect you to buy another one in 12 months' time because there's a new model out. And the fact that the functionality, what you actually get included is, we always go on about functionality compared to some of the other brands, and what you get. Even some of the other brands trying to play in that same braggy kind of price point, and one of the big brands trying to play in that 100K price point, it's still not the same experience as what you guys try and provide. And I think that's probably the no-brainer.
And I think having had a little exposure to Barco over a few years now, with Bragi and Boulder and now the Freya. I'm in awe of these products in every level. I mean, I'm lucky enough I get to dive through the interface and the things that you can do with this. And we just picked up the lens on the Freya today. Oh my God. That is just a piece of art. And, I think you guys could actually sell some of your equipment as modern art. It is a wonder to behold. I think for anyone who doubts it, you come and see us. We'll put one of these lenses. Well, we may not, but you can have a look at these lenses, and you can have a look at the equipment, and we'll show you what's involved in these products, and you can see and feel and touch them, and they are something else.
And just by looking at them, and even like today, I said, you look at it, you're in the presence of it, and it just there's that grand feeling to it.
Yeah.
The same way that a Rolls Royce pulls up and it just gives you goosebumps. You don't get that from any other projector on the market. I mean, it's as simple as that. But
back down to earth on a couple of subjects, I guess.
Yeah, back down to earth.
Here's a curly one: motion control. There's been a few announcements from keeping it as the director intended. And we've had some challenges with motion control various times. What's the Barco take on that?
I would say we are always about following director's intent, which is indeed why you had that public service announcement, basically by Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie. Was it last year or the year before, where they actually did a passionate plea online to everybody. Please just turn off the feature on your TVs, on your projectors, whatever, because it's not what we intended. We do not want you to be looking at the dreaded soap opera effect. So I think that's the key thing to keep in mind there. Also, when playing video games, again, with gaming becoming more and more important, even in these large screen experiences. Also there, it's actually going to start introducing artifacts more than it's going to be doing any good or solving any perceived problem, I believe.
Okay.
I think also anything Tom Cruise says is yes, so.
Go, you can ask this one.
Yeah,
I'm not going to ask this question.
But is 8K a thing? I mean, this whole, I walk into, we have JB Hi-Fi over here, which is obviously, mass box moving business, and that's fantastic. But, you walk in and the first thing you see is brand new 8K TV. We can't even get 1080 right or 4K right. I mean, is it a thing?
Is 1080? Is 8K a thing? So it's a difficult one to address. So the consumer market and flat panel displays are always looking for a new reason to move hardware, essentially. Yeah. And arguably the easiest way for them to do that is resolution, or now with HDR as well, that's an alternative kind of mechanism they've got. But resolution has always been the easy metric for them to push. Now, when we're talking about projectors, projectors are a slower moving market than consumer displays typically. I believe I'm correct in saying I think there are a handful of projectors that will do 8K, not natively, so they'll do like an E-shift, as it were. Is it required? Realistically, not. No, there is no consumer content that I'm aware of that we can play back at 8K to an 8K, projector or consumer display, unless it's something we've captured ourselves on a mobile phone, for example, that is capable of, capturing 8K. In reality, much of the content that we watch and consume actually may not even be 4K. If you actually look at how motion pictures, for example, are captured, most of them, or many of them, may well be captured in a mixture of 4K and lower resolutions. They may well then be compressed in, post-production for distribution of content and management of file size, etc. So in reality, actually much of the content we watch, although the box itself, the packaging it comes in, or the digital stream we're looking at may say it's 4K, that isn't all what it's chalked up to be. So I would suggest, as you guys implied when you asked the question, is, let's get the content correct first, rather than chasing, kind of I won't say hypothetical numbers because they're there, but you know what I mean. Rather than chasing an unachievable goal, when we're talking about content, and particularly as things are progressing more and more towards digital, we have to be able to distribute content in a way that consumers can consume it. You've only got to look at the difference between a 4K Netflix or other streaming provider versus a physical disc format. The bit rates are significantly different. Your Freya projector, with that level of projector, if consumers want to, they can play back DCP, digital cinema packages, which are the same quality of content that cinemas play. And those are typically 2K or 4K, and even the 2K versions of those, I would argue, are higher quality than a 4K UHD Blu-ray. So is 8K a thing? Yes, it exists there. I can go out and, as you say, I can buy a display that's 8K. Will I get any benefit from it? I might get a little bit of benefit from it from a scaling perspective, on my TV at small scale images. But I'd probably sooner play it back, 1-to-1 if I can, and not rely on the scaling in the TV. Yeah. So for me, I would say focus on the technology and the content that's here now, rather than, looking ahead to the future too much. I also remember the days when many consumers got burnt when I think it was when HD came out, if I recall, when plasmas were first out, and many customers adopted the first HD displays, and then all of a sudden I forget exactly what it was called. Andrew, you probably recall better than I, but the HD Alliance or whatever it was came out and actually wrote the specification, and all of a sudden those customers with their HD TVs couldn't play back HD content because they didn't meet the criteria of the standard. So I personally always think, it's nice to be on the cutting edge of technology and an early adopter, but I never jump too soon. And I don't believe that we as Barco, certainly with DLP technology, will have any 8K projectors, certainly in the near future.
I think there's another really important factor, and there's a very quick story that tells this. I was asked to go out and calibrate a TV for a couple, and that had been installed by another company, and I got there, and my first question as I walked in the door was, tell me what you watch. And this older couple proudly opened the drawers and showed me thousands of DVDs, and they had been sold an 8K TV. And, we forget that there is still a massive back catalogue or library of content from PAL to, 720 to 1080 and so on and so forth that is out there. And, to me, it's kind of criminal to sell someone, say an 8K TV in this case, when they watch DVDs, because the pictures, despite, incredibly clever upscaling, look shocking. And they would have been far better off with an old plasma or a 1080p TV. And in fact, we've just put a PAL CRT in our foyer, and, Rec 709 on a CRT is still a reference, and it looks great. I have an issue with people just being sold 8K if nobody says to you, what do you watch? If you want to upscale your 4K, okay. But as you said, a lot of 4K isn't 4K anyway. And I don't think, and we need to do a video on this, but I don't think people realize how many times that image has been duplicated on that screen, and stretched out and interpolated, and it looks shocking. So, I'm quite happy to sit, to be quite honest, I would be quite happy to sit at 4K, no problem. But really, I'm not chasing 8K today. not to mention, and we haven't even touched on bandwidth, and and it's interesting that HDMI as a standard is, the whole holy grail of HDMI was uncompressed media, uncompressed audio and video, and now, surprise, surprise, to transmit 8K, we're talking about going back to compression again. So, I'm quite happy with 4K for today. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I'm still happy with my CRT TV, but that's okay.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, if you look at how far people view the display, typically you need greater resolution because screens get larger and we're sitting closer to them. In reality, even on a really big projector screen sat pretty close to it, 4K resolution is going to be sufficient, unless you are, one of the very, very rich sultans of, Dubai, for example, and you're sitting 1 meter from the screen, realistically, you probably wouldn't tell the difference between 4 and 8K.
Yeah. So a while ago, I did a video on color space, and one of the things that hit me was, a lot of projectors were selling, again, numbers, and, as a calibrator, I deal in 3 axes, basically, obviously. So we've got hue, we've got saturation, and we've got luminance. And one of the things that seems to skip under the radar, because it's nice to print 2-dimensionally, is the CIE color chart and your, Rec 709, DCI P3, BT 2020. But what customers don't realize is that chart is actually 3-dimensional. It actually comes out and pokes you in the eye. And it's the actual luminance of those colors. And one of the things that I find with Barco is that Barco, in my opinion, has done a better job of actually paying homage to that third axis. And that speaks to getting to, from DCI to BT 2020. We're already sort of, we're 45 minutes in, so we'll speed it up a bit. Do you want to talk quickly about that?
Yes, I guess, as silly as it sounds, what's the specific question? What do you want me for your viewers to address there?
Okay, so fair enough. So, we've had Rec 709, we've gone to the DCI P3 color space, and then we've got BT 2020. Obviously, in terms of saturation, it's getting there, but in terms of color luminance, and what the question is we're seeing better color luminance out of things like the Bragi LED platform. Boulder. Bragi LED platform. The Boulder
Bragi LED, correct.
Laser platform. And it's my impression that we're getting better color luminance out of this. How important is that? And I guess the other part to that is, how far away are we from BT 2020, and is that important?
Fine. Okay. So the color luminance is very important. That's what, again, helps us get more realistic real-to-life images, and again creates that dynamic range within the colors themselves, which help to give us that more realistic representation of an image. And as you rightly say, we look at the CIE chart and we see, the saturation and everything in 2D, but, with that becomes that third dimension, which is the brightness, the luminance of each color. And, with SDR content, that's not too difficult. We're talking up to 100 nits, but with HDR content, we're talking up to, potentially 10,000 nits. We're not realistically there by any stretch. With laser and LED, we can reproduce that because of the inherent brightness levels within the projectors themselves. So I think it's the power of the DLP light engine, the fact that we can push more light through it, that help us get those greater luminances within the color. In terms of pushing from P3 more towards BT 2020 or Rec 2020, again, yes, that's something that is happening. We have projectors that can do that. So with the Freya that you have, with its RGB light source, we can actually achieve up to 98.5% Rec 2020, with our Thor and Thor Plus 100% Rec 2020. So that is something that's achievable, in the here and now. That then comes down to, will the content providers, or when will the content providers get there? There is already some HDR content that does expand beyond DCI-P3. There isn't a huge amount, but there are some that are mastered slightly wider than DCI-P3, but certainly not pushing out to Rec 2020. So the technology to display it is there already. We can achieve it, but you are at the thick end in terms of budget to achieve that. But again, it's like the 4K, 8K conversation we just had. The content is lagging behind somewhat. And in reality, I think the content is going to lag behind for some period of time.
But if someone, who had the desire and the means, they could have a cinema today that has that capability with Barco products.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, correct.
Great. Fantastic. So come and see us. We'll build it for you. There you go. All right. Look, guys, we'll wrap this section up. Barco now and Barco the future. Is there anything you guys want to talk or touch on briefly about Barco in general? Is there anything, that is coming up, or is there anything that you guys want to say in conclusion after everything that we've talked about?
Well, talking about upcoming things is always a bit challenging, let's say. certainly with COVID throwing a couple of wrenches in there.
We won't tell a soul, I promise.
No, I would just say that at this point in time, if you look at the history of consumer electronics technology, be it at a more affordable level or the high-end spaces where we are situated, I think there's never been a better time for enthusiasts like ourselves and lots of our clients to be in this passion. You've got great audio video gear. You've got installers and integrators that are operating at very high levels, that have been trained very well by various manufacturers, by various independent organizations as well. So there's lots of hardware, lots of knowledge available. And with the pandemic, I think if anything it has shown us is that there's this tremendous appetite for people to be enjoying content, be it sports, be it video games, be it films, be it classics from back in the 80s, because you've seen all these back catalog titles being issued now on 4K HDR, getting brilliant new versions. So to sum all of that up, to make a resume of all of that, I think we're at a great time. And if people would ever think about investing in a very high-end solution that will give them pleasure for years to come, right now is the best time ever, I think.
Look, I agree. And I think, I was about to shoot a video on what is home cinema, and to me it's an evolving thing. I think it will be a room in the home where we don't just get entertainment, we get to travel to places we can't go to. We'll get education, we'll get family communication. I think we're only at the very beginning of what home cinema is, and I think Barco, because of its expanded arms in other areas, is going to be a key player in that. And I think the other important thing for me is, one of the things that we get is what people think is a home cinema and what we think is a home cinema is often very different. And until they've come and seen what we do, or we've built one in their home, they have no concept. They really don't understand. We still get, you can't get a good picture with a projector. It's like, come and have a look. You really need to see, because our concept is putting a true cinema with all of its capabilities in a home, and hence our relationship with Barco. But look, guys, we're going to move on to another topic, which will be the Freya. So we'll look forward to talking about that. But look, thank you for talking about Barco in general and some of the technical issues and questions about Barco and projectors in general. We really appreciate it. Thank you.